Good evening, classmates, and tonight I'm going to be discussing the Scopes monkey trial. The Scopes monkey trial is one of the most famous court cases in American history. It was known as the trial of the century when it occurred in 1925, and it was known as the trial of the century at least up until the O.J. Simpson trial. Up until 1995. It is also one of the most iconic court cases in American history, but it is also one of the most inaccurately remembered and misinterpreted court cases in American history as well. The Scopes monkey trial, as it is popularly known, took place in Dayton, Tennessee in 1925. The actual issue is somewhat misinterpreted. The defendant in the case, John Scopes, was a local math teacher. He was actually acting as a substitute teacher for a biology class at the local high school. He was not a real science teacher by any means, and he was actually even reluctantly teaching science in that case. Part of the reason that we misinterpret a lot of what actually occurred at the Scopes monkey trial was because of the popular film Inherit the Wind, which glorified both the defending attorney Clarence Darrow as well as the actual teacher who was on trial, John Scopes, to an extent, and was generally very pro-science and generally anti-religious, at least in terms of the film, which kind of misrepresented what actually occurred in the trial. But as often the case, people remember the movie better than they remember the actual history. In reference to the Scopes monkey trial, the teacher was actually a reluctant participant. He had been encouraged to teach biology by a friend of his named George Raplia, who was a local mine operator and investor. He had been interested in this because of the ACLU, the American Civil Liberties Union in New York, had put an ad in the newspaper encouraging someone, a teacher, to challenge a law that had been passed in Tennessee that forbid the teaching of evolution in public schools. So basically the ACLU wanted to challenge this, and they were looking for someone to get involved. So it was, in a way, it was an orchestrated event, not a it wasn't like John Scopes was a brilliant science teacher who wanted to enlighten the local backwoods populace. He was someone who basically was put up to it by a friend, and that friend had only been interested not because he was pro-education or knew anything about evolution, but simply because he wanted to bring national attention to Dayton, Tennessee, and hopefully get some investors for his mining company. So the background is not very well explained in the film Inherit the Wind, but nonetheless, there was a trial, and John Scopes was put on trial for teaching evolution. In reality, the true stars of the trial were not either the actual issues at stake, which were the teaching of evolution in the public schools. It was actually the two defending and prosecuting attorneys. The defending attorney for John Scopes being Clarence Darrow, who was a famous, high-powered attorney. He was also a widely known atheist who practiced out of New York, who was hired by the American Civil Liberties Union to defend Scopes, as well as an equally, if not more famous, William Jennings Bryan, who was acted as the prosecutor who was prosecuting Mr. Scopes. Bryan was more famous for having been the Secretary of State under President Wilson, and also having run for the Democratic nomination for president 3 times unsuccessfully himself. Bryan was also a noted Christian fundamentalist, or certainly what we would consider a fundamentalist today, and he was against the teaching of evolution in the public schools. One thing that is also not remembered accurately or fairly is the actual content of what was being taught, or actually, more accurately, was not taught, since Scopes actually didn't even get around to teaching evolution before the trial itself occurred. But what was found in the controversial textbooks would also be considered controversial today. One example being that it was stated that in the textbook that the highest form of man was the Caucasian human found in Europe and America, which even by a conservative interpretation would certainly be considered racist, if not inaccurate. And also some of the actual science behind it was also very murky, and certainly wouldn't live up to today's standards in the classroom. But nonetheless, it wasn't about the actual content, it was about the showmanship of the lawyers, which is what most people remember. And in the film Inherit the Wind, Clarence Darrow is declared the hero, and William Jennings Bryan is considered a somewhat noble but ultimately backwards fundamentalist. But nonetheless, Bryan actually won the court case, and basically the rest is history. Thank you for watching my presentation. Have a good night.